Start letting folks in now.
6:28. It's amazing that the world. Talking about you, Dan.
Hello, everyone. We'll be starting in just a few moments, so just give us a couple. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Good evening and welcome to another Environmental Leaders Learning Alliance event sponsored by the Federated Conservations of Westchester County and Teatown. A few housekeeping details for those of you who are live with us. There's exits on either side, restrooms in the back, and some modest refreshments on the table. For those of you attending both in person and via Zoom, this is not a public hearing. There are no plans to build a battery energy storage facility nearby. ELA is an educational forum for local officials and members of conservation advisory councils. Following the presentations, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A, and I ask that you hold your questions until then. And those of you on Zoom can post those questions via chat. We have 6 very well qualified presenters this evening, and it would be too much for me to read all of their bios. And those bios will be included in the video of this evening. But very briefly, in the order that they will present, Ron Kamen, to my left, is the founder and principal of Earthkind Energy Consulting and runs the Clean Energy Action Coalition, a program of the Business Council of Westchester. Veronica Polanka is a project manager, and she is a clean energy professional with NYSERDA, specializing in battery energy storage systems with extensive experience in permitting, siting, regulatory coordination across New York State. With her is Camille Warner, also a project manager on NYSERDA's Clean Energy Siting team. She works directly with local governments to develop permitting procedures to support responsibly sited land-based clean energy technologies. And Michael Bowles, over here, is a project engineer with Energy Safety Response Group, ERG. During his time with the City University of New York, he worked closely with New York City Fire Department, Department of Buildings, and the Mayor's Office of Sustainability to streamline permitting and energy storage systems in the 5 boroughs. And he also serves on the EPRI, Battery Energy Storage Fire Prevention and Mitigation Advisory Committee. George Howe, to my right, has been with the ESRG since 2020, following a 25-year career with the New York City Fire Department, where he served as a lieutenant in the Hazardous Materials Response Company for 15 years. And lastly, Dan Gallia, to my left, worked as an engineer and program leader for electronic testing at Consumer Reports, and for over 4 decades has been the co-chair of Tarrytown's Environmental Advisory Council. So we'll start with Ron. Ron, go ahead.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Bob. Thank you, Teatown and the Environmental Leaders Learning Alliance for the opportunity. Thank you, all my co-presenters here. The purpose tonight is to talk about the reason why the Business Council is involved in this issue, and then to talk about the need, the facts, safety, risks, and what we're looking at in the future going forward. So without further ado, here we go. So first, the Business Council founded the Clean Energy Action Coalition in 2025. We launched it in 2025 as a way of dealing with these issues, and we'll talk about all that in a moment. But there's 125 different participating organizations, everyone from clean energy providers, from the efficiency, sort of the solar, heat pumps, electric vehicles, charging stations, through the engineers, the landfill, the land use attorneys, a host of providers, developers, and then individuals as well. Developers who are looking at this as a way of making sure that we have enough power and clean and sustainable. Our key principles in terms of the energy system is to be reliable and resilient, affordable and sustainable. And those are key concepts that we have to discuss everything. And looking at that, some quotes to frame the discussion, which is that first, the least cost energy is that which we don't use. That's why the peak demand reduction and the energy efficiency programs are so key, because it's affordability, it's reliability, and it's also sustainability. But another concept that we think is really key that hasn't been widely recognized, the cheapest source of electric power in New York State is last century's renewable, New York hydropower. Water power is currently the cheapest source of energy in the state, and that's because when we own and maintain a renewable energy infrastructure, we build it, we own it, we maintain it, and what happens is the water flows, the wind blows, the sun shines, and we get fuel-free, inexpensive power. And that's a driving fact that we need to recognize as we deal with the cost issues of energy and our rising cost and our ability to run our economies. Simultaneously, when you look at efficiency, we're also dealing with air source heat pumps, which are 2 to 3 times more efficient than any fossil fuel burning system out there. Geothermal, the heat beneath our feet, which is 4 to 6 times more cost effective and more efficient than any fossil fuel that's out there. And also recognizing that renewable fuels can immediately reduce diesel transport emissions and oil heat. And we'll talk about that a little bit too. Not a lot tonight. There's a whole piece of our focus on that. But the key thing with that renewable diesel is that we can make a transition to where we can reduce emissions and particulates and carbon by 2/3 to 80% with no changes to the infrastructure. You just drop in this renewable fuel. That's a conversation for another night. And the key thing that the Business Council always says is, hey, okay, you don't want to do clean energy, you don't want to do solar and battery storage, what's your alternative? And what does that look like? What's your plan B? So real quickly, to just deal with the reliability issue that's out there. In May last year, the independent system operator that runs the grid came out and said, hey, we've got enough power for the summer. We've got about 1,000 megawatts statewide. We're good. We don't have any reliability issues. But then when you looked a little closer, what you saw as part of that subtext was that reliability concerns persist under extreme weather scenarios. And what we see is that the New York grid is reaching capacity. And what does that mean? It means that during the summer, under that May report last year, if there were extreme weather heat waves, we wouldn't have enough power. As a matter of fact, if there was a heat wave of 3 days, we would be short 1,000 megawatts. If there was a heat wave of 5 days, we would be short almost 3,000 megawatts, which means blackouts across the board. And one of the things we all know is that if we don't have electric, we can't do anything in this society anymore. Con Ed territory, electric consumption is up 20% in the last 10 years. 4 of the top 10 electric peak loads of all time happened this summer, and it was the highest peak ever in June. What does that mean? It means that, gosh, we almost run out of power. We almost had blackouts across the board. And in October, the independent system operator came out and said, yep, we've got reliability violations in New York City and Long Island because of all these different factors. Generation is retiring, demand is retiring, got an aging generation fleet. We got people using more electricity for everything, public policies, supply constraints. We have a lot of reasons why we have to be concerned now about having enough power at the times that we need it. In Westchester, we have an additional challenge, which is that we had 2,000 megawatts of the Indian Point nuclear power plant that got taken offline. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We could talk about that another day, but the reality is that 2,000 megawatts is a lot of power that some way or another we need to make up. So keep that in mind. One of the things we're seeing now is because of that, we're seeing increased power outages. So far, they've been sporadic and they've been localized, so we haven't seen them across the board like we did in the 1960s where the power went out or other extreme events. But we saw it this summer. We saw it in October. We saw it again in November. And if you take a look, every month now, there are outages in certain localities. And again, when you run out of power, that means you have no heat, you have no lights, you can't function, you can't have internet. There's no way you can function in society. So having enough power is critical and key. And then, as most folks know, we've had some extreme weather events that we've been experiencing lately. In June, we have coastal flooding that happened. We had basically a whole host of communities that had to deal with emergency situations where the rainfall shut everything down or we couldn't move, we couldn't function, etc. We had chunks of highways, the Sprain, the Taconic, the Bronx River, the Sawmill Parkway shut down from flash floods. We had things like a sinkhole shutting down the Sawmill River Parkway, a sinkhole underneath because of these extreme weather events. So clearly, extreme weather is happening more often. It's not just happening here in Westchester, it's happening across the country, it's happening across the world. But across the country, over the last time since 1980 to the present, there used to be about 9 climate disasters per year on the average since 1980, and that's including the recent things. But the thing we have to recognize is that those events are increasing. We're now up to 24 climate disasters per year countrywide of $1 billion or more. And when you take a look at the way that the weather is progressing, what we see is that 100 years or so ago, we had an event like Sandy once, is it coming up? It's a little delayed, there we go. Once every 500 years. By 2017, it was 1 in 25 years. And now what we're seeing is that's increasing to the point where we are having a Sandy type event of an extreme weather event, shutting everything down once every 5 years. Another thing to recognize is that for every 5 years of delay that we don't hit our carbon goals, it takes 13 times that amount of effort for make up and reduce the carbon impacts on our environment. So clearly doing something sooner than later is really key and important to keeping everything going. Now we know what the perfect solution is, right? The perfect solution is that we green the grid, we electrify everything, and we do it with speed and scale. But the question is, what can we do today? How do we have an impact as we systematically transition to a clean electricity generation across the board, passive new home construction, energy efficiency upgrades, electric heat pumps, electric vehicles, virtual power plants, we need to recognize that first, we still have to heat our buildings and we still have to stay warm and we still have to use our existing fossil fuel infrastructure. So let's not get rid of it before we have the transition ready. And second, we need to bring in transmission. So one of the things we absolutely need to think about is we need transmission. We need additional transmission downstate. We have to support that. It makes total sense. We have to bring especially upstate renewables. And then though, locally, what we can control very well is we can exponentially increase peak demand response, solar energy and battery energy storage systems, and biofuels with renewable diesel. So real quickly, just on the renewable diesel piece, and again, we'll do another session on this another time, but renewable diesel is exactly the same as fossil diesel, except that it's made from vegetable oil and it's then refined. It's a biofuel. It's like biodiesel was, but now it's refined. So renewable diesel is refined to the point where you can drop it in to any diesel situation and it produces 2/3 less emissions. And you can also use it for the 100,000 homes that heat with oil in Westchester, 2/3 less emissions by dropping in this renewable fuel. We don't have to change the infrastructure. All we have to do is get the different delivery system. That's what California has done. They're almost totally off of diesel transportation, off of fossil diesel. They're on a renewable fuel now in California for almost all their usage. One of the things we've done with our partners at Sustainable Westchester and elsewhere, the Clean Energy Action Coalition has identified that when we take a look at all the energy that we're using in Westchester, it's 5.44 billion kilowatt hours a year. We've identified by municipality exactly how much energy, electricity is being consumed by each municipality. If we did all of that with solar, it would take 4,300 megawatts worth of solar capacity. Westchester currently has about 260 megawatts worth of solar. That's about 5% of what we need. So clearly we need a strong effort to get out there and make things happen. But one of the other things we have to recognize is that this summer, what saved us were these demand response programs. 100,000 consumers in Con Ed territory shed some load. They turn off lights, they increase their temperature on their thermostat a couple degrees, they shut off their electric water heaters, they didn't charge electric vehicles during peak times, and that demand response saved us 1,000 megawatts. And that's what kept the grid up and saved people money this summer. And that's one of the things that we absolutely have to do is everyone should be participating in these demand response programs. Everyone could save money by doing it. Sustainable Westchester has a grid reward program that lets people go. Right now, there's 7 megawatts, enough to instantaneously power 25,000 homes. And people can save a little bit of money doing it. And it keeps the grid up. It keeps us going. It keeps everything happening. City of New Rochelle, by the way, is saving $70,000 a year with these programs. It makes total sense. On the peaker plants, what we've seen is that as we took off some of the other older generation now, we're moving, unfortunately, to natural gas more than we are to renewables. And by doing that, we're actually increasing emissions, increasing carbon from 77% now up to 89%. But here's a piece that's really interesting. And this is where the future will be and where we're going to wind up with. In California this past summer, 100,000 customers who had solar and batteries were participating in a program where they fed those batteries into the grid. And by doing that, they effectively avoided a crash and did 500 megawatts worth of peak reduction through demand response with battery energy storage. That was a quarter of the nuclear power plant, the Indian Point nuclear power plant, basically by everyone just participating in this joint program. When we take a look at cost and the way to get this new generation into the grid, the fastest, lowest cost new generation is solar with battery storage. And when you take a look at the numbers, what you see is that there is dramatic savings to be had when we install these solar systems with battery storage across the board. We can save money, get this generation into the grid as fast as we need it, and make it happen. We've also identified per every community, which communities are leading with solar generation. And we're going to be working with all different communities to bring out the message that we need more solar and what can they do and how can they spur this technology. When you take a look at who's been doing it, to give you a sense of where the low-hanging fruit is, one of them is in carports, solar carports, like White Plains did a community solar program. Not only did they generate megawatts worth of power, but they're getting $1 million per year as a revenue stream from doing that. IBM is doing it at the Watson Center, not too far from here. We have Regeneron, the largest employer in the county, doing massive amounts of solar on their campus. We have Croton, who, a bunch of people here from Croton, by the way, amazing solar and battery storage with electric vehicle charging stations. We're going to be doing site visits to this site and a bunch of others to show people these technologies and how they work and how they can generate revenue, as well as have a positive environmental impact. And then what we've also done is now we've documented for all the parking lots in the county, all the parking lots more than 5 acres, winds up being about 230 megawatts, 10% of Indian Point, just on large parking lots. We then also looked at parking lots of 1 to 5 acres and said, oh, there's 1,500 of those. We could do another 580 megawatts worth of power from the parking lots of 1 to 5 acres, and you add it all together, that's 800 megawatts worth of power that we can have. And when you take it down to a small scale, this is one just example of solar with battery storage with an electric vehicle charging station here in Bedford. What you see is that that combined technology can reduce demand by 75%, give you an 84% reduction in cost, and have dramatic impact on your bill, as well as on the environment, as well as on resiliency, et cetera. And if you just look at battery storage, this was one office building that just installed battery storage by itself, and they saved a pile of money, and they have resiliency built in. So when the grid goes down, they have backup power, and they're saving a pile of money. One of the main things that people are concerned about is fire. And look, no fire is good. Every fire is toxic. And one of the things we're talking about, the main thing we're talking about today is fire safety. And one of the things, though, to recognize, and we're going to say this a couple of different times just to make sure the point gets through, is when you take a look at the number of installations that are happening across the country, what we see is an exponential increase in battery storage installations and an exponential decrease in failure. That's because of the design, because of the technology, because of all the different pieces that we're going to talk about tonight that keep things safe and keep things moving forward. But simultaneously, we've also documented that across Westchester, we have bans where communities are doing either moratoriums or bans. Mount Pleasant passed a ban on all battery energy storage system, as did Mount Kisco, even residential ones, small ones. We have Yorktown that banned all battery storage. Yorktown's even going to ban a community solar system, except for maybe 1 or 2 grandparents' projects. These are things that are going to hurt your community, that are going to hurt your pocketbook, that are going to hurt the environment, and that mean that we're going to all be suffering if the grid goes down because we don't have enough power. So NYSERDA has a bunch of different sample laws. We're going to hear from NYSERDA tonight about some of the things that are going on. And what we've done is we've looked at those communities and we've identified certain communities that have different laws in place: Briarcliff, Croton, Ossining, Newcastle, Northcastle, Greenburgh. Although Northcastle apparently is having a little change of focus. So again, we need to get in front of this and stop all the emotional reaction and get to the facts and the fact that we need these technologies out there. And one of the things the Business Council of Westchester with the Clean Energy Action Coalition is doing is we're doing direct advocacy and education. We're working with municipalities, we're working with schools, we're working with first responders to get this information out there and let folks know that these are critical technologies at a key time in our existence that we need to actually bring these out. We have a whole bunch of educational programs that we're rolling out. Love to work with you, bring these programs out there. Best education stuff on the new fire code. You're going to hear from that tonight from two fire experts, a fire engineer and a former firefighter who's now involved in this whole thing. We have fact sheets about energy storage and how it compares to other technologies. And when you take a look at Westchester and what the Business Council of Westchester is doing with the Clean Energy Action Coalition, we have 4 things that we're promoting this year. 1, reduce peak demand. Everyone should be participating in the grid rewards and the demand response programs. It makes sense. It keeps the grid up. It keeps us in power, and it saves you money. Fast track solar. Put solar wherever you can, on parking lots, especially the commercial flat roofs, on brownfields, on right-of-ways. Fast track battery energy storage systems, especially with solar. But whenever we could take power off of the grid when it's available and it's cheap, deliver it during the day, and then we'll have enough power to make sure that we have it during those peak times. And last but not least, use, promote, and incentivize renewable diesel with public and private fleets and for all the oil heat customers. And so our immediate piece is demand response, renewable diesel for fleets, buses, and oil heat, and then on-site and community solar with battery energy storage systems. And if you want to find out more and find out how you could save money and about these technologies, come to the April 14th Clean Energy Action Conference that we'll be having. More information on the Business Council of Westchester's website. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Camille from NYSERDA, who's now going to talk about Battery Storage 101. Camille.
Thank you so much. Hello, greetings, salutations. My name is Camille Warner, and I am a senior project manager on NYSERDA's Clean Energy Siting team. Next slide, please. Clean Energy Siting team, Veronica and I work with municipalities across the state to teach them about clean energy technologies, solar, wind, and energy storage. We give free technical advice. We help communities with model laws. We have one-on-one trainings. We work with communities to understand the considerations with respect to the various technologies. On the screen that you see a number of guidebooks that we have. They're free and available, and our email address and our website to access these resources. So why are we talking about batteries? Batteries essentially act like a giant battery for the electric grid, like the battery that you have in your cell phone. It stores electricity in sunny days when solar panels are overproducing, and we can then use that power in the evenings when the sun is not shining. It helps the grid in two ways. It makes it more resilient, and it helps to save money. And on the next slide, we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. So here are the different applications for energy storage by sector. The first is for the utility companies. So it helps increase renewable integration. So as I mentioned, if you have a solar facility and you pair it with an energy storage system, and that solar system is overproducing, you can save that energy in the BESS and then use that energy to power your utilities at night. So it makes it easier for the utilities to integrate. You can also reduce your dependence on fossil fuel peaker plants. We heard a little bit about that earlier today. So peaker plants are typically off the grid, so they're unused for most of the time, and they're called in emergencies when there's high heat or really, really cold, when everyone's plugging in their demand, when there's a high demand. And it takes a long time for them to kick on, and they release emissions. And so energy storage systems can be turned on instantaneously, and they have no emissions associated with their normal use. For grid operators, very similar. It's very important for the grid to be balanced. And so energy storage systems allow the grids to balance the supply and demand associated with electricity usage. Improve power quality and avoiding costly system upgrades. So the infrastructure that we have across the state of New York is aging. And so having energy storage systems helps to delay the need to upgrade these expensive upgrades. And then finally, for commercial and residential customers, both of energy storage systems can help reduce energy bills and generate revenue. As I mentioned, energy storage systems defer the need to build out expensive infrastructure, and that need is often given to, or the cost of those upgrades are given to ratepayers, to us. And so using energy storage systems, we can delay that upgrade and reduce bills. We can also keep critical equipment online during power outages. So if the power goes out, you can use an energy storage system hooked up to a business or a residential home to power lights, fridge, critical infrastructure. Next slide, please. So what do these systems look like? So you can group them in a number of different ways. Starting on the side, we have residential systems. These are your really small systems. They power anywhere between 1 and 2 homes, and they're behind the meter systems, which means that the energy that's stored in the system goes to the home, to that residence. You have on-site retail, which are additionally behind the meter systems, a little bit larger, and they serve buildings. Again, this energy stored in the systems supports that building, that structure. Jumping over to offsite retail, these are front of the meter systems. And these systems shoot the stored electricity directly to the grid to serve the local distribution grid. And then finally, you have your larger systems, and they are also front of the meter, and they serve high voltage transmission grids. The last two are not able to serve a local load. They're supporting the grid itself. So what do these systems look like? These systems can be broken up into units too. So the first, kind of the smallest unit of an energy storage system is called the cell. It looks very similar to a AA battery. And so once you have a bunch of cells wired together in parallel or in series, you have what's called a module. And when you wire a bunch of modules together, you have a rack. And when you put a bunch of racks together, you have a unit or a system. Another critical part of every energy storage system is the BMS, or the battery management system. And this is basically the eyes, the ears, the brain of the system. It's capable of monitoring each individual cell in the system. So each one of those units that you saw in the previous slide that looks like a AA battery, it's able to monitor each individual cell and track thousands of data points per second. It can send alarms if there are issues. It can regulate and kind of separate affected cells or modules. It can activate fire protection systems and prevent further failure. Additionally, there are several safety features here that the BMS can provide. So when you look at the system as a whole, you can see the different containers, you can see the BMS, the battery management system, and a number of other systems listed on this slide that help the system work as designed. So there are a number of different types of batteries and chemistries. I'm sure some of you have seen or heard of some of these systems. And you can see in the slide a number of different types of cells. So cells, again, are the smallest units. So you can see cylindrical cells and pouch cells. But the most popular cell today is lithium ion. And we'll talk about why on the next slide. So lithium ion is by far the preferred chemistry for a number of reasons. The first is the size. It has a very high density, so it can store a large amount of energy in a very small space. So it won't take up as much space as other kinds of chemistries. The speed. It can charge and discharge quickly. So think of your cell phone. You can plug it into the wall and immediately get charged and then use it to charge your devices. Lifetime. So it can last a long time without having a lot of high maintenance fees. So you don't have to replace the system as often. Charge retention. So when the energy storage system is just sitting there, like your cell phone just sitting on the table, it doesn't lose charge very quickly. It can hold on to that charge for a long time. It is less expensive compared to alternative forms. And that's one of the major reasons for that. It's because of its technological maturity. So it has extremely high market penetration. So if you think of your cell phones, your remote control, your toys, your golf carts, your laptops, your smartwatches, vapes, e-bikes, etc., all of these things are already powered with lithium ion because of all of the reasons that we talked about. So how do these systems get permitted? So in New York State, the permitting depends on the size and whether or not the system is paired with generation. So if the system is paired with a renewable generator, so solar or wind, and it's less than 25 megawatts, it's permitted with you at the local level through SEQR, the State Environmental Quality Review Act, or whatever municipal county requirements are on the books. If the energy storage system is paired with a renewable generator, that's solar or wind, that's greater than 25 megawatts, it's permitted at the state level through either the old Article 10 process or the Office of Renewable Energy Siting and Electric Transmission, or the ORES process. If the system is standalone and less than 80 megawatts, it's permitted with you again at the local level. And if it's a standalone system standalone system that's greater than 80 megawatts, it's also permitted at the local level, but it has additional licensing with respect to the Public Service Commission. So this is a really important distinction, the difference between land use and fire code. And I'm going to read this because this is really, really crucial and often gets kind of tangled as we start to discuss energy storage systems. So the first thing is land use. So land use is designed to regulate the use of land, the density of land use, so how much is allowed in that specific space, and the siting of development. So residential homes, commercial homes, energy storage systems, solar, etc. It ensures that residential, commercial, and industrial developments coexist in a planned and organized manner, and it encompasses environmental regulations, permitting requirements, and redevelopment guidelines. So you'll see that SEQR, the State Quality Environmental Review Act, is reviewed during land use review. Now, the fire code is something entirely different. It establishes mandatory fire safety standards for new and existing buildings, facilities, and processes across New York State. New York City has its own code, which does the same thing. And it also regulates fire prevention, hazardous materials, emergency preparedness, and building safety. So that's a lot of words. So the primary difference between these two things is land use governs where and what you can build, so zoning, redevelopment, etc. And the fire code governs how that building, how that structure is designed, maintained, and operated to prevent fires. And I'll pass it now to Veronica.
Thank you. And I'm just turning. Hello, everybody. My name is Weronika Ciechowska-Polanko. I'm very happy to be here with you tonight, and I'm also part of Clean Energy Deciding Team, and I will talk about Fire Safety Working Group, what has been done so far, some updates to the fire code, just a little bit of an introduction because Mike will take a deep dive on fire safety, and I also will talk about some resources that are available. So here's just a picture of one of the New York State battery energy storage sites. This one is very close to Buffalo. I just thought it would be good to add some pictures of sites that are live today. This is like a picture from inspection that was happening. So we have to remember that, as Camille mentioned, we are used to lithium ion. We carry it all the time, and we're used to all the electric equipments that we have at home, but all of this equipment and infrastructure carry some fire risk, and we're used to it. We live with it every day. Luckily, we have Underwriter laboratories that developed over 1,700 safety standards, which are testing multiple of different devices and systems to make sure that these are safe. Lithium-ion cells are one of these items that are tested thoroughly. Not only lithium-ion cells, but whole modules and whole systems. And that allows us to determine if the battery is safe. That also allows us to be proactive and reactive to address thermal runaway, which is another way of saying that there is an incident with a battery or a battery system. That's when the cell gets a little angry and a little hot. You know, when we are charging our phones, and usually they're able to emit some of the heat. Sometimes the heat is generated faster than it leaves the cell, and that's when the thermal runaway can happen. This is our favorite chart, so we're using it a lot, but it's a very reputable source. That's why we're sharing it, and it shows again the failure incidents per deployed gigawatt hours. So if you look at the orange line, it just goes down exponentially. And then if you look at the triangle, which is the cumulative deployment, it shows you how much a battery energy storage has been deployed so far. So you can put the two and two together. More storage, less failures. However, yes, we have to remember there were fires in New York State, Warwick, that some of you have mentioned in the comments, as well as East Hampton and Chameau. We are very well of these, and that's why Governor Hochul decided on convening an interagency fire safety working group. And this group has been composed of very reputable agencies like DISHES, OFPC, NYSERDA, Department of Environmental Conservation, DPS and DOS, and subject matter experts. So there were not only state entities involved, but also private firms, as well as New York Power Authority. And all of these entities were working very, very hard on making sure that this type of incidents don't happen. Unfortunately, they do happen sometimes, and they will happen sometimes because, as we know, electric infrastructure can catch fire. However, these are very important steps that were taken, and we would like to share them with you. And they are available for you on NYSERDA website. Preliminary aerosol and water data findings report, 500-page report for you. All of the data is available there, and no reported injuries and no detected harmful levels of contaminants linked to the fires. Also, issuance of final fire code recommendations, which we're going to talk about in depth. There were also field inspections and quality assurance of 57 in-service projects in New York State. Through lessons learned and because of these inspections, we have decided that all municipalities in New York State need support. That's why we decided there will be a third-party peer review available, and it will be a requirement. So what it means that all the projects that are now going into review will be also reviewed by a third-party expert and inspected by these experts. We also have a webinar available to you that is on YouTube. If you would like to, you can go on our website, it's right there. We also will be examining and assessing root cause analysis for every single fire that happened. So as some of you might be know, right now we have 2025 New York State Uniform Fire Prevention and Building Code. It is effective. It started to be effective December 31st. And we're going to talk about major additions and recommendations that were implemented. Just very briefly, because Mike, who's sitting on my right, will take a deeper dive. Number one, peer review, as I mentioned before, it was at the discretion of the AHJ. Now it's required. Hazard support personnel, it was at the discretion of the AHJ. Now it's required. Signage, it was required. Now it's enhanced. Emergency response plans and regular fire department training, it was not required. Now it's required. Also exemptions for battery energy storage cabinets. So they were not really mentioned in the code. Now they are mentioned. We make sure that they are included in the 2025 fire code. And now we will have a little bit fun fact, myth and fiction happening. I hope you enjoy it. So myth, battery storage systems easily catch fire. Again, I'm sorry, guys. We don't have, we have to get more graphs, but this is a good one. So these very high profile in the news, as we know, but they are very rare. And the ratio of the incidents reported, it has declined significantly over the years because of the improved system design and applicable safety standards. What happened on Moss Landing could happen here. We are not doomed. I'm telling you, we're not doomed. This is not the end. The Moss Landing battery facility structure was globally unique. There's no a place like that on planet Earth. New York battery facilities are sited only in buildings that are specifically designed to store battery energy storage, and Moss Landing was not for that purpose. And New York has a strict equipment testing and listing requirements. So you have to remember that because this technology evolved so fast, Moss Landing was an old project, considering if we talk about the projects today. Battery storage fires release toxic fumes that are extremely hazardous to nearby residents and will negatively impact air, soil, and water. Studies have shown that storage fires result in emissions similar to a house fire or building fire. Environmental reviews of soil, water, and air consistently show no harmful contamination. And if you would like to, you can go to American Clean Power Association website, where there is a whole beautiful report on, I think, 97 battery energy storage facilities that gives you all the information about environmental risks. So you're free to find it and read it. A battery storage fire would require evacuation of everyone in the immediate vicinity. We now know that safety experts do not recommend evacuations. And of course, our safety experts and fire experts, which are with us, are able to also answer these questions if you have more. Battery energy storage should not be located near residences or schools. Oops, we went too far. Okay, thank you. Battery storage projects that comply with testing and safety are safe to site near residences and schools. And there are community storage facilities that can provide important services to the neighborhood grid and get also community involved. And this is a picture of a community storage installed very near in the school in the Bronx. Firefighters are not trained or prepared to deal with battery fire. All projects are required to have emergency response plans and annual training, and must be offered to the local fire department. So it's not an if, it's a must. Hazard support personnel must be enrolled to the incident within 15 minutes and arrive on site within 4 hours. And this might seem like it's a lot, but there is nowhere in code written about any other type of incident that anybody has to arrive within any time frame. So that time frame has been discussed with many subject experts, and they decided that it is applicable to battery energy storage systems. And battery storage fires, they don't require any special equipment. And now quickly, I'm just going to remind you about the resources which Camille mentioned in the beginning. So you can just simply Google NYSERDA Clean Energy Siting Team. We're there to help all communities and towns in drafting of their laws or help with permitting, providing education. And we also get support from regional clean energy advisors that are there for you. And these are also very important. These are the chapters that you can find in our battery energy storage guidebook, which was actually updated in January. So these are the different chapters. You can more than welcome to download it. We have battery energy storage FAQ and also the peer review resources there. And you can also email Eva Hoskin that helps us in the Westchester area, and she can help with many different exercises and zoning exercises, can support drafting or updating local laws. So she's also there for you. And right now I will hand it over to Mike.
Thanks, Veronica.
Here.
Yeah, I'm Mike Bose, Senior Project Engineer here at ESRG, or Energy Safety Response Group. So we are a team of essentially firefighters and fire protection engineers. We've been working closely with NYSERDA over the past several years with the Interagency Fire Safety Working Group. And tonight we'll go over kind of a lot of the updates to the fire code based on some of the work we performed during that time. So as NYSERDA mentioned, in 2023, there were a number of high-profile fires in New York State. So this Interagency Fire Safety Working Group was established by the governor. Work that we hit the ground running with was re-inspections of essentially all the energy storage projects in New York State, looking for any deficiencies in code or differences in the technology used or siting concerns. We did an emergency response analysis of the incidents that took place, with which we had a lot of the environmental data that was collected and analyzed. And from that, we put together a number of fire code recommendations for the updated code that was recently adopted. And some of the biggest things that I want to highlight here, which actually Veronica and Camille mentioned a little bit, are in this slide here. So peer review, emergency response planning and fire department training, the hazard support personnel that are now required to show up on scene. Different things around the explosion control, different little nuances in the code and some language that we fixed. Enhanced systems monitoring, requirement of central station monitoring so the fire department gets automatic notification if there is an incident. We also need periodic inspections of the sites, and then additional security of installations, extended signage, et cetera. So we'll dive a little bit deeper into those. And I'll provide a little bit of background on exactly why we chose to include these. So first off, the peer review. So for all NYSERDA funded projects, there is going to have to be a third-party peer review that's performed. Now, this was really, we stumbled upon this realizing that a lot of these sites kind of weren't all compliant. They were a little bit older. Sometimes the code was a little bit lacking, and by no fault of their own, some of the AHJs and decision makers, didn't have the right information or were constrained with resources or knowledge of energy storage systems. So what NYSERDA and the rest of the working group decided was, hey, we need another level of safety here. We need a safety net to catch things to make sure that nothing's slipping through the cracks. So a specific or specified peer reviewer will be looking through this, going line by line to make sure that every project under the NYSERDA funding gets reviewed.
It may add also projects that are not under NYSERDA funding are eligible,
Okay.
actually.
That was great.
Required by the
Great.
code. Yeah.
Thank you. These have to be credentialed people with a specific background in energy storage safety. And you can see the number of different documents that are reviewed. We'll have a resource that includes all of these coming up. Emergency response planning and fire department training. This is a big one. What we've seen across the board with projects across the globe really has been that the first responders weren't completely sure about the technology. Again, it was very new at the time. Now a lot of the local fire departments are getting trained. There's a lot more information out there. But when we were going around to all these sites during those re-inspections, we noticed that very few of these sites actually had physical copies of the emergency response plans on site or at all. So a requirement now in the 2025 fire code is that we'll have physical copies of the emergency response plan provided on site outside of the fence line of the project so that the fire department can access that from a safe distance and have that information on the site and on the technology and different hazards and emergency response procedures at their hand when they get there. The way that this will work is draft plans will be provided to the authorities ahead of time because sometimes technology can change, things like that. Emergency contacts might change, and then this will be finalized prior to commissioning of the system. We'll need additional annual site visits and review of this plan to make sure everything continues to be up to date. Hazard support personnel. So like Veronica was mentioning, we need somebody. Another thing we noticed during these the incidents was that nobody from the system ownership contacted the fire department or showed up on scene in a timely fashion. So what we really want to do is hold the system owner's feet to the proverbial fire and make sure that somebody is responsible that will show up on site within a period of time. And these people have to be trained in the operations, at the installation, the specific technology, and the response procedures that are in place. And this is really to support the fire department, so somebody is able to give them information, not leaving them holding the bag. There were little nuances in the fire code language around explosion control. This essentially allowed cabinets to get around that. Now we need it for every project, and any deflagration vent panels, things like that, you're going to have to make sure that the signage adequately addresses that and shows where that's located. Systems monitoring. So like we were talking about with the battery management system, that'll give you a lot of good information on what's happening on site. But a lot of the time what we saw was that maybe the system owners weren't fully aware of this, weren't able to access it in real time. We want to make sure that if the fire department gets there and they need additional information on the state of the system at that time, they're able to get that. So using the telemetry available, able to look, hey, is there a temperature rise going on in one of the cabinets? Will this potentially spread to another fire or another cabinet? And then be able to take necessary precautions in response to that. So some of the big ones that we're looking at there are the temperature, the voltage, state of charge, et cetera. And then this can also be funneled to the hazard support personnel to communicate to the fire department. Central Station, this is a big one. We were noticing that the fire departments weren't automatically communicated with really at all during some incidents. Again, across the country, we see the same story. So we need central station monitoring to be provided for all projects coming up. That essentially means that there's a licensed central monitoring station that if they receive fire alarms from the system, will reach out to the local fire department to let them know that something's going on there. Really important periodic third-party safety inspection. So when we were going through these sites, we would notice things like, hey, some of the vegetation is overgrown. There were a lot of things, or the system has changed material in some way, or emergency contacts were changed, or hey, maybe even the system ownership changed. We need to make sure that these are routinely reviewed to make sure that everything's up to date. So we have a requirement here that it's performed at least every 3 years. We might recommend doing that more often. But this really needs to be done by a trained professional, meeting the requirements you can see here. And the inspections include the items that are found in this little box here. So we'll be looking at the hazard mitigation analysis, electrical inspections, making sure that everything's where they say it would be. Security of installations. So this refers to video monitoring of the systems, essentially providing video monitoring of the sites with a minimum look back period of 72 hours. This is good for not only being able to, review any incident that occurs, but also, will be available in real time to the system owner and the fire department if needed, so they don't have to put themselves in a dangerous situation and just review remotely.
Not sure.
And then signage, additional signage. What we noticed going around to these site inspections also was that there was no straightforward contact information for some of the emergency contacts. So we really need to include the name of the system owners, the hazard support personnel, anybody that needs to be communicated with during an emergency. And that has to be clearly identifiable, project fence line, and available to the first responders. We also would like to have maps of the site that show where the energy storage enclosures are located. And again, making sure that the fire department is aware of all these when they arrive on site.
Not working, huh?
That doesn't like me.
Funny. Huh. There we go.
Okay.
All right.
We're-
That's it for you.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, pass it over to Dean.
Yep.
And Dean is going to talk about Tarrytown's experience going through this process of looking at battery energy storage. And Dean, if you would.
I thought this would be a good brief overview of what municipalities, CACs and municipalities and any other participants here might run into if they have an applicant in their community and they actually go through with this. So there's a little bit of a timeline here. Myself and our village administrator went to an NERSER training workshop way back in 2019 and learned a lot about this. And I made a recommendation through our Tarrytown Environmental Advisory Council that the board should adopt a local law ahead of actually getting an applicant proposing a system. That didn't actually happen. And what ended up happening is suddenly in 2024, we had this company called Catalyze applying for a BESS in Terrytown. And they were referred to the planning board for environmental review. That took a few months, and planning board then did a site plan approval meeting with the applicant. And then there was a series of meetings on site with Terrytown fire officials, which is an important thing to get on board early in the process. Planning board then recommended a local law, and it was based on the NYSERDA law, model law, which is actually very complete and very well written. They recommended rather than a zoning, an actual zoning for BESS, they recommended a floating overlay zone that can be applied to any other type of zoning within the village, and to, you know, permit BESS in, let's say, a commercial area or even a municipally owned area. And they also issued a negative secret declaration because they didn't see that there were any environmental hazards that couldn't be overcome. Then the next step was about 2 months later, they came up with the actual application. Well, I'm sorry, getting ahead of myself here. The applicant then produced the application for the Board of Trustees to review, and then they held a special work session to approve that. There would be public hearings to bring this issue to the public and to, you know, interested parties, any stakeholders. There were 2 main public hearings on the BESS application. People were invited to speak, and if you, I'll show you a little later that some of the outputs that came from those public hearings. And finally, at the 3rd public hearing, they closed the public hearing and passed a resolution because they answered the people's questions adequately and had all the ducks in a row at that point. The area in Terrytown that this was going to be put in is right in the lower part of this parking lot right here. Along this is Route 287, and there's an entrance ramp that comes off here. And it turns out that the area that they chose, and this was done in league with the applicant and the planning board. There were 4 different areas along here. It's about the only place in Terrytown where there is some open space that's not right near residential areas. That would be more of a problem for our village because it's pretty heavily built. But this area here is far enough away from this building, and they deemed that this clearance to the 287 wasn't going to be a problem. There were some steep slopes to deal with, and then there was some environmental review that had to be done. And this is kind of a little schematic of what the BESS system. It's a 4 megawatt system, and it's going to be right here in this corner, as I showed in the previous one. And that's basically the layout of the system. There's a lot of specs there. Basically, it's a lithium-ion system, as NYSERDA folks said, that's what's, you know, basically what's going in. There are new technologies coming out, but they're not commercially viable yet. 4 megawatt hours, as I mentioned. It's got all the bells and whistles in place: battery management system, thermal management system, pollution control, monitors. It has temperature sensors that will immediately shut the system down if there's temperature rises of even just a few degrees in a module. And there's direct notification of the fire department if anything's going bad. So, and it's in a securely restricted area with video monitoring, as you noticed. These are some of the safety provisions, as I mentioned: fire suppression, and a third-party monitoring of the design, and also periodic monitoring by a third party to make sure that it's going to be you know, secure for the long term. They do have a site-specific emergency response plan. Basically, everything that the fire experts here said is in place for this. And that 4-hour window for getting the experts there to deal with it is in place. Of course, the fire departments, the volunteer fire departments in Terrytown would be notified immediately, and they'd be there to, you know, keep people away from it, make sure that no nearby structures are you know, in jeopardy, and just basically wait for any kind of an emergency to take care of itself, because there's really no way of putting out a fire in this kind of a situation. However, I should mention that the technology that's going to be used in the Teatown system is one of the best known. Is the Tesla cabinets that there's never been a fire incident with them, and they tried to get one of them to break down, and they tried 3 times with impacting them with materials and try to overload them, and they were able to get a fire going in one, but it didn't. It went out almost immediately. So these are good systems, and they're very safe. Of course, there was a huge amount of information provided to the village trustees, zoning overlay plans, SECRA, the third-party review by ESRG, and the entire packet of design information. That's not an actual picture, but you could imagine it's a lot of information. A lot of this is available on the village website, Terrytown, if anybody wants to go and look at that. And I can go to that in detail. As I mentioned, our law was based on the NYSERDA model law, but they did make some changes to accommodate Terrytown and the applicant specifically. Some of the sections were rearranged, and as I mentioned, they established the permit as a floating overlay zone for zoning, rather than a special use permit, which was what was described in NYSERDA law. It's just a matter of choice how a village or municipality wants to deal with new zoning regulations. They also added some screening and landscaping, because that's in an area, it's a commercial area. They wanted to make sure that it wasn't going to be seen as an eyesore. So they added setback requirements and landscaping to that. And other changes they made to refer to pre-existing sections, taking them out of the best law itself and just referring to them. And also added sections on decommissioning and abandonment to meet village requirements. And there was a few things that came out of our public hearings. One of them was that people were saying, what's into this for Terrytown? The applicant is going to make money by buying energy at low cost and selling it at a higher cost, because this is a standalone system. It's not directly associated with renewable generation. So they looked at the fact that in New York State, there's apparently a property tax exemption on renewable energy systems that would reduce the amount of income that the village would have from this. And people said, well, what are we going to do? They decided that they wanted to enter into an agreement for payment in lieu of taxes with the applicant. And the applicant agreed to go through with that. So that helps, the village finances and helps reduce the concern by residents that somehow Terrytown's not getting anything out of this. But they're obviously going to be getting a percentage of the income from the system as well. And the other stipulation here was that this particular zoning change is currently applicable only to this applicant's proposal. And if it's going to apply to future applicant, future installations of BESS, they're going to have to go through the same SECRA review and have specific applications. So it's not a blanket approval of all BESS systems. Just to show you some of the things that came up in public meetings from the mayor and the trustees. The Mayor Brown asked for, why did they choose this site? And she brought up the issue of, what's the benefit to the village? The deputy mayor was concerned about, training of the fire department, and the applicant was very straightforward and specified that they're going to provide any training that's needed, and not only to the fire department but any other jurisdictions that would be coming from this. So, if, for example, this is close to Irvington, and if the Irvington Fire Department was called in because it's closer than some of the Terrytown fire halls, they would probably need to be trained in advance as well. One of our trustees, who happens to be my next door neighbor, is also wondered about, you know, training and was assured that that everything's going to be in place there. And the issue came up of, you know, whether or not the fire department could do anything except allow the system to burn in the case of that, not burn itself out. Fire department officials themselves were really concerned about some of the issues that were talked about here, about toxic fumes and you know, the idea that fire departments want to put out fires, they don't want to sit there and watch them burn. So they had some concerns about that, you know, being a different paradigm than they're used to. As you can see in the bold print there, this by the way, this deck will be available if you go to terrytownenviro.org/Ella. A lot of this information is available to you there. I'll put that at the end. Negative statements from the public had to do with, you know, appearance and you know, proximity to residential areas, which is not, so that wasn't an issue. Somebody else said, well, you know, you're worried about gas-powered leaf blowers, but you're not worried about this high-tech system that could catch on fire. You know, there was some mythology there that needed to be taken care of. Actually, were as many positive statements as there were negative statements. People realizing that this needs to happen if we're going to have a build out of renewable energy, and we want to reduce the cost of electricity because we don't want to power up those expensive peaker plants that end up raising electric rates. There's a statement from myself here that I talked about the need for build out of BESS and talking about the law that was passed. It's, you know, based on NYSERDA law that I reviewed and saw was very good. So I gave them some kudos. And if you go to terrytownenviro.org/Ella, put up a page on there that contains links to all this information here. The model law, the text of our law, text of this journey. And there's also a couple of articles were written, one by in our Terrytown Environmental Council newsletter and one in our local online newspaper. And there's also this video that is a really kind of entertaining explainer of BESS and the ins and outs of it, why it's needed, and you know, covering some of the hazards that the new technologies have mitigated, and also talking about new battery technology types that are going to be coming out. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Dean.
And that video can be found here on the site. It's an excellent video, by the way. It makes a lot of sense for those who want some common sense to go along with stuff. So
We have time for questions, and we can start with anybody who happens to be in the room with a question for the panel.
well, I'd like to raise the elephant in the room. And George, I think you were in Warwick, if I'm not mistaken, at that fire. And if you could talk about why that fire is not indicative of all the technology that's now coming out, that would be really helpful. George, if you would, just your background again, please, if you'd be so kind.
I'm formerly with the New York City Fire Department. I was an officer with the Hazardous Materials Unit. The Warwick incident, it was an older generation battery energy storage system. It was made by Powell. It was a centipede line. The fire initiated in one segment. It was contained to that one small unit of the line. It didn't propagate down the line, or it didn't propagate across to any of the other ones. It was out. There's no active fire flaming when I arrived on scene about 8 hours into the incident. I was not actually responding to it. I was just asked to go there. And so I mean, no fire is good, but when the fire happened, it performed predictably in terms of the fire protection.
The thing with Warwick though, George, is that it was the third time that that site had a fire, right? Which is like really disturbing to everybody. So could you tell like why, what is different about that compared to every other site that's now happening and being built around the state?
Again, it was an older technology. That company is out of business right now, actually. And that site, those two incidents were in 2023 at two different sites in the town. And this incident, again, they don't know the exact cause, but the good news is that this was contained, whereas not at that specific site, but at the other site, it wound up propagating. And the steps that they took as a result of that contained it to one unit within the enclosure, and it made it a shorter fire.
Thank you, George. Once again, I turn over the questions to those on Zoom. You might take your screen down. I don't know, Dan first and then Leo. And then whoever wants to answer, repeat the question.
Yeah, there is a lot of talk about some legislation up in Albany without getting into the politics of it, but something to do with, it's characterized as taking away local zoning authority around these types of events. Does anybody maybe explain the mechanics of that, again, without getting sort of deeply politics, but what it would do or wouldn't do, if you know? Sure, it's a popular topic.
Anybody like to take that?
Well, the NYSERDA folks talked about
If you
the
could
larger.
repeat the question?
Yeah.
So the question is just, is legislation up in Albany right now that would take away local control, Dan? Is that basically what you're saying, right? Take away local zoning control, and is that a good thing, a bad thing? What does that look like? Is that?
Well, let me answer that. There have been attempts over many, many decades of state government to take away local control, and it's never happened.
There are local municipalities are putting out petitions and lobbying for it not to happen. I'm just curious whether there's anything to it or not.
Land use issues lie solely with the municipalities, and it's not likely to ever change. There's a whole history of that.
I mean, we haven't heard anything in particular, so.
No. And then Leo, did you want to ask them?
Yes, either way, do the same in Westchester, dance, we advise local municipalities in Westchester County on solar energy storage and other things. My question was, that the model ordinance that NYSERDA had published before for battery storage had a sort of dividing line of tier 1 and tier 2 systems. Tier 1 was everything under 600 kilowatt hours. Tier 2 was larger than that. And I'm delighted to see you just published your new manual, and I'll go look at that tomorrow morning first thing. The slide that you showed, putting solar energy storage systems in different sort of size buckets for use cases is similar to the slide I've used many times. You've got 4 buckets, which is great. So you've got the small residential commercial bucket under 80 kilowatt hours. And then you had a sort of on-site commercial use behind the meter or a DC fast charger at an automobile dealership or something along those lines. And I forget what that size was. Then you had a third bucket that was for front of the meter, sort of called community distributed generation projects. And then you have the largest bucket, which is the utility scale, like 20 megawatts or larger. And those are falling at the Office of Renewable Energy Siting. So for local zoning purposes, does your new model law create 2 buckets or 3 that you had before, or suggest 3 buckets? And the reason I'm asking, sorry, if Ron has to repeat this whole question, I'm trying to talk loud, so you may not have to.
I have to. That's okay.
Okay, I'll stop there.
Okay, so the question becomes, for those who are online, is that under the model law that was there were 4 buckets, right? 2 buckets, 2 buckets. Now there are 4 buckets. What?
They described four.
They described four at the meeting. Okay, so would you guys speak to the buckets of sizing? Because there are, as Leo just said, there's kind of one bucket would potentially be residential, another bucket would be kind of commercial, like an auto dealership. Third bucket would be in front of the meter, but smaller, and then the fourth one would be the high utility scale kind of bucket. If you guys could talk to those and what the ramifications are.
Great question. Thank you. So the update to the guidebook does not change the model law. One of the things that I started that we on the siting team do is we revisit model law. So that might be something that we look at in the future, but right now it hasn't changed. It's still 2 buckets up to 600 kilowatts and larger, and that's how it is right now.
Oh, great. Any other questions from those in the room? Yeah.
For the benefit of everybody, will all the slides that have been presented, will they be available to all of us? It's wonderfully rich in information, by the way. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for that. Yes, not only.
Share it.
Yeah, and we'll ultimately post a video of this whole session. Any other questions? Yes.
Great. We're here at Teatown, and I'm the chair of the Conservation Board of Newcastle. And I'm getting phone calls and emails from folks around concerns around wildlife. And I'm wondering if you could share, is there any data? Are there any concerns around air? I mean, I saw the slide saying there are no concerns, but I'd love to substantiate that somehow for our.
So if you can repeat the question, go ahead.
Are there any concerns with respect to soil, air, water, wildlife, etc.? So far, based on every data taken from incidents across the state, not just in New York, there have been no reported incidents of any impact to soil, water, air, wildlife. Did I miss one? Air. A document that I would highly recommend that all of us read before bedtime is the American Clean Power. They did a thorough assessment of environmental impacts to facilities across the country, and that's going to hit soil or water. Wildlife was not impacted because the incident stayed within the LOD, within the limits of disturbance of the facility, and so there are no wildlife within the limits, the fence line. So it was not impacted.
So there are requirements around fencing.
Yeah. So there's requirements with specific to setbacks, to vegetative clearing, etc. So you're not going to have anything living, walking through the site.
And the birds, is there anything that would draw the birds in?
No.
Is there anything that would draw the birds in? Please repeat
There-
the question.
sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
There's nothing that would draw the birds in. The question is, would anything draw birds in? The answer is no. It is not. No, it is not.
Yeah, I should mention that in the case of at least the installation that I talked about in Terrytown, the cabinets holding the batteries are what they call non-enterable. So even mice and whatever are not going to be able to get into it and short things out or whatever. And it's obviously going to be fenced. There's circulation of cooling air around them, but that's no more than you get from an air conditioning system on a building.
That the air in any way that
Not unless there's a fire, and if there's a fire, then sort of all bets are off because there will be some fumes. Sure.
the overlay district is for each applicant.
Yeah, it would be a zoning overlay that changes the characteristics of that section of the zone, of the existing zone. So it's overlays over that and says, okay, just for this little area where the of concern of the proposal or the applicant's proposal is going to have different zoning. They're not going to actually they're not going to change the zoning map. It's specific to each applicant.
But the overlay comes with a minimum offset distance residential, etc.
Yeah.
I may call you offline.
So the question was just regarding zoning in Tarrytown, and what it is they're not changing the zoning at all in Tarrytown. What they're doing is this overlay zone makes any applicant go through a process to define what's going to happen at that particular point in site, and that particular site, and then they have to go through the standard process of getting the planning board and everybody else involved to make sure that it's going to meet all the criteria that everyone feels is comfortable. Is that right?
Exactly.
Thank you. And another question?
Does that sort of make any recommendations as far as siting and distance from other activities, schools, shopping centers, anything like that.
So does NYSERDA make any recommendations about this minimum distances from schools or residents or shopping centers or anything else?
So thank you for your question. NYSERDA is not a regulatory body. We just give information out to the public for free. So it's the fire code that's responsible for separation distances, setback distances, et cetera. And so we lean on and tell everyone to follow the fire code because it's going to say separation distance of 10 feet, for instance, from anything that's combustible. I don't know, Mike, if you want to add anything about separation or UL 9540A.
Yeah, no, so there's nothing, at least, that NYSERDA has put out thus far that addresses that. It's great to have it as remotely located as possible, although there's always going to be challenges sometimes with sighting because of interconnection points, things like that. What we've found we've had people say, oh, we want this a mile away from anything, things like that. And from what we've seen with all of these incidents, it just hasn't been the case that we've seen impacts like that, right? As far as you can get away, I think from a site, I think that's good. But again, a lot of it really, it kind of hasn't had that much of an effect that close.
It's a zoning.
It ends up being a zone.
But it's a zoning decision.
Well, within the limits of the fire code. So the fire code is the strictest thing you should follow.
There's some additional fire tests if people want to get really close to things. In New York City, we've got things very closely packed, in which case there's additional fire testing that can be done and then use the data from that to inform some of those distances.
Any further questions? All right, if we could see those on Zoom. we'd
Yeah,
welcome any
so
questions
yeah,
from-
let me go through a couple of them here because I think there's a couple that are there's some comments as always, but then beyond that, there's a question: is there any information on toxicity of the fumes from battery fires? And they know that there's different kinds that are making this even harder to answer versus the ongoing toxicity of the forever leaking gas infrastructure normally emitted through our use of fossil fuels. So firefighters, would either of you care to comment on the relative safety or hazard of battery fires versus natural gas leaks, et cetera?
Or house fire.
Or house fires?
I love this question. It had me going in one direction and then they kind of brought it to the other side. And there isn't a lot of great information on the houses right now. We've actually been doing a lot of research into that and how do we make this direct comparison to make it more accessible to everybody so they can see that, right? We have a lot more specific information on the battery fires. There's a lot of stuff out there now, especially, with some recent incidents and a lot of additional testing that's been done around batteries. But actually finding a lot of the stuff around the structural fires, and George, you can comment on this as well, but, we've been pouring through a lot and the direct comparison hasn't been made for a while.
I agree with you.
Yeah. But we are looking to do that because I think that's an extremely important resource for the industry and community.
So one of the questions that always comes up is the pouring water on these fires and then the aquifer impact, the impact on the aquifer and the water quality. Could you guys speak to that a little bit, please?
Yeah, so we've we run a test lab that was required by the town to collect soil sample or water samples to see what was going on in it. What we found was there really weren't a lot of the things that people were concerned about, the heavy metals, things like that. Those usually end up being sort of contained in one area. We recommend, all the time, reduce the amount of water if there are concerns about that, contamination runoff. We like to allow these things to burn off their flammable gases, let them do their things. But we haven't seen an impact. And again, going back to a lot of the soil and water samples that have been done. I think there are always things that people can do in terms of, retention ponds, things like that, or ways to direct the water there. But from the data we've had thus far,
I can say that in the case of Terrytown, there's a small creek that runs near the site, and the applicant was asked and agreed to have several monitoring wells between the construction site and the water runoff area that will be monitored periodically, even without there being an incident. But that's not able to touch anything.
More questions?
So do any of the experts or the fire safety working group have a report of the long-term health studies
Well, it's very new technology, so there isn't anything like that right now. I think that's where that, question's going. There hasn't been anything thus far. What I do know is that there haven't been any reported hospitalizations, things like that for a lot of these, unless it's somebody just calling to complain about something for the sake of it. But for all of these incidents, we haven't had reports of people being hospitalized. No, we called hospitals even to say, hey, has anything come in? Just, out of curiosity, and we just have not had any of those.
Are there
I
any
think
long-term studies?
long term, I think for just the battery standing there.
Yeah.
We're talking about health?
No emissions.
That was the health.
Yeah, it's such a new technology that a lot of that isn't there yet, but I'm, sure we'll have more data coming out.
So someone says that no one's mentioned how much electricity is pulled from the grid to service these systems. The amount of electricity that service these systems that are like lost in the translation?
I can talk to that a little bit. The standalone systems that are not served by storing renewable energy, like the one in Terrytown, they're going to be charged. I mean, the whole business model is the owner will buy power when it's inexpensive, and it's inexpensive when there's a lot of surplus of it. So they'll buy power to charge the BESS when there's extra power on the grid, and they'll sell it when prices are high, because the spot market changes hour to hour, minute to minute during the day for grid power. They'll sell it when it's higher, and that's their profit. So that will actually even out. It will serve to even out the draw from the grid rather than draw when they're not going to charge these things when there's limited power available or where there's a peak.
Yeah, one of the things that people don't realize is that when we do hit those peaks, there is a lot, really hard to get that electricity through the grid because it's really stressed out, right? So you have a lot of losses and a lot of stress on the grid just trying to force energy through when it's peaked out. And what the best systems do is it allows you to grab it when it's plentiful, when it's flowing smoothly, when it's a lot more efficient to deliver, and then it delivers locally when you need it at those critical times. So that's one of the key components that folks really need to deal with. All right, how much water from? Oh, 1 second, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry.
So I've been ask that question is, well, these best systems have some maintenance requirements, for example, the cooling and the monitoring system. And I think there's a misconception in the community that these best systems are not as efficient as they seem, and that they're by refrigerating them all the time, it's really, the tax benefits it's costing us. And I think that's really a misconception. If someone could explain it better than I.
Okay, so the question, just to repeat the question, is that there's a perception from some folks that these best systems are not as efficient as folks say because they need to be cooled. And there's also a question here about how much water is used to keep the batteries cooled all the time. And is that a factor, and how does that factor?
I mean, when I think about battery energy storage, I think about the air conditioning units. Of course, they use the energy, but the calculations in the business plan, all of that is taken under consideration from the very beginning. And these conversations are at the very beginning when there's not even sometimes a design in place, because these conversations start with the utility. And when there is this conversation and actual study done with the utility, it's not that the developer randomly comes there and just puts it there. There's a study done with the utility if that battery energy storage is going to make economic sense for the developer and for the utility. So all of that is calculated, and the notion that the community is worried that the developer is going to spend money on the air conditioning, that doesn't make any sense.
And there's no water usage.
There's no water.
There's no water usage.
The batteries.
No.
Okay.
No.
So that's a misconception as well. All right. This says WG, the working group recommends training, but it's not mandatory. That's not true anymore. It is mandatory, right? Training is mandatory across the board. So that guarantees that. Those were recommendations, but now it's been codified into the fire code itself, right? So those are not just recommendations. It says BESS are millions of dollars to construct. How will this be passed on to the ratepayers? So, I mean, my perspective is this, is that, my simple explanation is this, is that, yep, it takes money to maintain the electric infrastructure. And the only way these things make sense, the only reason a developer is going to do this is because there is a difference between what it's going to cost them to build it versus what they're going to get out of it. And that difference, the utilities are also weighing into that difference because that is supposed to save them money. So the reality right now is that we have an electric infrastructure that is deteriorating, that needs billions of dollars worth of infrastructure investment. That investment is going to come from somebody. It's either coming from it's always coming from the ratepayers in some way, shape, or fashion, but the battery energy storage systems actually save us money in both the short term and the long term. And when you do it again with solar and renewables, the key thing is, again, the cheapest source of power in New York State is renewable energy from water right now, and from water, solar, and wind is going to be the place to go over long term, because again, you build the infrastructure, you maintain the infrastructure, and nature supplies the energy that we then get cheap power. Okay, so it says the grid includes, and that includes FFs. I'm not sure what FFs are. Firefighters, I guess, maybe. We need reliable, safe, affordable energy, and best in none of these. I guess my perspective is this, is that if you want the affordable, cheap, long-term renewable energy, you need to pair it with battery storage so we can deliver it when we need it all the time, 24/7. Let's see what else is here. There's no climate emergency. This is insane. Well, that's a whole different conversation. Greedy private equity people. What's that? Okay, great. Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you, Austin. I wonder if there's any information on the toxicity of the fumes from battery fire. Oh, we already did that one. We're going to send out the slides. The aquifers are in danger of being contaminated. I think we addressed that one so far. What does it matter if one community permits this and a fire happens and surrounding communities will be impacted? Toxic fumes have no boundaries. One of the firefighters want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, all fires contain toxic smoke, and that's just what we see across the board. There is a lot of data right now that shows that exact same message. Hundreds of pages, I think even NYSERDA has, with some of the data that's been collected. So definitely understand the concern, but keeping it in perspective, I think, is very important at this point.
Okay. Yeah. There's a lot of just comments, I guess would be the right way to say it. ORES is appointed to rubber stamp these dangerous projects. You want to comment on that, NYSERDA?
What's the question?
ORES, Office of Renewable Energy Siting, is just appointed just to rubber stamp these dangerous projects.
So ORES only has jurisdiction over projects that are paired with generation, so solar or wind that's greater than 25 megawatts. And it's by no means a rubber stamp. ORES is, if you think of it, it's like Seeker on steroids. It's a very comprehensive, robust evaluation of the projects, and not every project is permitted. I highly recommend taking a look at the new Article 8 regs to see how robust these permitting processes are. So it's not by any means a rubber stamp. Great.
Thank you very much. Boy, I'm trying to find a real question in here. So a 5 megawatt BESS is 110,000 lithium batteries. Who wants that in their backyard?
It's not going to be in the backyard. So.
It's not in their backyard. I mean, I would say there's millions of lithium batteries all around us. Every cell phone, every laptop, every car, every electric car, every vape.
Every regular car.
Every regular car, everything that has a battery in it in your home, every VCR, every TV has some type of battery in it. So, we got batteries, folks. It's here. All right. There's a lot of comments about Warwick and Moss. We've talked about both of those. I don't know if there's anything else you guys want to say about either of those. It says, well, one thing here, I'll comment on this one. There's been zero savings since the transition to solar and BESS. All we are seeing are utility bills skyrocket. If you really want to take a look at your utility bill, you should identify where the cost increases are coming from. And right now it's coming because the electric system is over 100 years old. It needs to be upgraded. The gas system is in massive needs of replacement and repair, and those costs are being built into your electric supply. So if you take a look at cost, again, the cheapest source of electricity in New York State today is last century's renewable, because if you build the infrastructure, the wind blows, the sun shines, the water flows, and you get cheap electricity from nature supplying it. We just have to build the infrastructure. So if you want to save money, build a renewable infrastructure. California, I do the complete opposite of what they are doing. Anybody want to comment on that? Just a comment, yeah. So
one version of the political split we have in the
yeah.
country.
So I would just say one thing about California, and we could argue about all the different pieces of it, but one thing I just want to make really clear: California's now diesel transportation system, 80% is renewable diesel. It has resulted in an 80% reduction in carbon, an 80% reduction in emissions, and now they are getting off of it's been price comparable to fossil fuels, and actually many times it's saving people money compared to fossil fuels, because we're doing a renewable energy infrastructure on the liquid side as well. And there's a whole host of things that we could talk about and go into depth there.
Then you spend less money on hospitalizations.
What's that?
Then you spend less money on hospitalizations of sick people.
On air quality and hospitalizations, and absolutely, very, very good point. I don't see any other real questions coming in from here. Anybody else? Yeah, please, sir.
Seems to me that the BESS systems are only applicable for developers who are going to operate them as a separate business. The example in Teatown, my initial impression was that the building ownership was going to use it for their own purposes, but it sounds like, no, this is simply like an out parcel in the shopping center. I'm setting up this BESS to be able to buy power, turning off hours cheaply and selling it during.
Okay, so I'm sorry, just to repeat the question for folks that are on here. So you're saying that the best developers are, rather than supplying power behind the meter to end users, they're just buying cheap power off the grid and then selling it into the grid when prices are high, and that's their business model? And is that a problem, or is that, I'm just trying to understand.
Or if we want to get more people on board to speak to the benefits that an individual property owner, whether it's a residence, whether it's an office building, shopping center, versus a developer, that is their business model. Separation. How would you describe the differential in terms of skills, capabilities? I mean, the reporting, the monitoring. The developers are set up because that is their business. But an office building, you know, they know how to prepare space and have it available for tenants. Monitoring a BESS is something outside of their skill sets.
Okay, so I think I understand it now, and then we're going to comment. So the question, just to repeat it, is that best developers, in particular those that are selling into the grid, have a business model that is benefiting them, and they're selling and making money off of selling into the grid. However, the real end users in commercial buildings or in residence, is there a business model out there for them where they can actually save money by installing the systems? And then how do we monitor that? Because they're not in the business of doing the technology monitoring, et cetera. Is that an accurate?
Not knowing the best technologies, because that was a corollary question. The Tesla system was mentioned. How many different systems are there out there for a potential investor, whether it's building a property owner, whether it's a developer, to be able to decide which one should I put in there?
So the question again, just to repeat it for the folks online, is if an end user, a commercial building owner or a residential owner wants to look at this, how many different systems are out there? How do they evaluate it? How do they make sure it's safe for them that they can actually do this and feel comfortable doing it?
Great question. I'll start by saying, so there are a number of different use cases for energy storage facilities. So you have kind of retail, community scale, we'll say, and utility scale. And community scale and utility scale are just like you described it. You have a developer coming in, they have a business plan and a business model. Residential energy storage systems are much, much, much smaller. So a lot of times they're under 600 kilowatt hours. And in the instance where a residence person or a business owner that wants to have a small system, they might look at, for instance, NYSERDA's, we have like a list of, what's a good way to
Providers?
say it? Providers, energy storage developers that can help a residential customer find the battery that they need. So there is a business market plan for to sell small scale energy storage systems to retail customers. That is a market. So NYSERDA, you can direct people to NYSERDA to help you find someone that's reputable.
I would wonder if like a comparable to a power purchase agreement or
Right.
it's a direct sale or.
So it depends.
They property owner owns the system.
So again, the question, to repeat the question, is that a capital purchase for an end user? Or can it be similar to a power purchase agreement or a lease where they can purchase a system and save money, or have somebody else put up the capital and they're saving money on a lease or on a power purchase agreement? Is that correct? Okay.
That depends on the developer.
It's probably 100 different ways,
Yeah.
you know, you can figure out a way to do it.
And
Yeah.
Ron, I would think that members of your Clean Energy Coalition on the private sector, some of them are there to serve the retail or the.
Yeah, actually, again, if folks want to come to the energy conference on April 14th, you could find and talk to a number of different energy providers. And some of those have specific business models where they go to businesses and they offer to put in these battery energy storage systems, even small ones, and then reduce their peak demand load, which is many times can be 70 or 80% of somebody's bill, reduce their peak demand load and then share in that savings with the end user. So those are business models out there. And then Leo, you had a comment?
My only comment was that the developers that will develop something in the front of the meter, they also be the ones that will develop it behind the meter and own it and manage it for the customer of the site owner. So that expertise of battery monitoring and operations and maintenance over the life of the system be coming from the same source.
So to just repeat, the response was that some of the developers who do in front of the meter will also do behind the meter, and they provide the same sort of monitoring and other technology services that in front of the meter folks might. Go ahead.
And just a quick comment that the fire code applies to all systems. So whether it's big, small, little, whatever, the fire code is the king of the world in this space. And so even if it's a very small system, it has to follow what the fire code says across the state of New York, except in New York City, which has its own fire code.
A question came in. Are there any financial incentives for battery storage for residential to commercial?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can, a residential energy user can opt into a demand-based rate structure so that they can charge their local gas that's attached to their house or whatever when rates are cheap, and use that energy when rates are high. So that can save them money. And that's also a lot of solar installers are packaging BESS along with the solar installations too. So you can save money by doing them together.
And are there NYSERDA incentives for the capital investment up front?
That's a good question. I know there's incentives. I don't know if it's for the capital upfront, but we do have incentives. And I'll
Yeah.
also add that and small energy storage that are community scale have that same New York Sun program where if you live nearby an energy storage system that's less than 5 megawatts, you can subscribe and receive discounts on your utility bill.
And Leo?
The question was, are there incentives for small businesses and residential homeowners to install battery storage, whether they have solar or not? The answer is yes, and it varies by utility. In the Congress and territory, the current incentives, the equivalent of 25% of the cost of the system. So a significant state incentive for $200 a kilowatt hour for solar system will take 25 to 30% of the
So to repeat that answer, yes, there are incentives up front. It varies by utilities. In the Con Ed territory, that incentives can be as much as 25% of the total capital cost of installing the system yourself.
And for most homeowners, that needs to pay back after the state incentive on the energy storage system alone without solar, maybe the storage is 4 or 5 years.
So the return on investment can be 4 or 5 year payback with a 20% or better return on investment. The more you use, the shorter the payback. And if you do a demand-based system, you might save even more, even faster. And as Dean said, there are other ways of restructuring your energy costs so that you can maximize your benefit.
Any other questions on?
Nope, that seems to be it right now.
For those on, this has all been great. I want to thank everybody who joined us this evening, both on Zoom and in the room. And I'd like to thank Camille and Veronica, Mike, Ron, Dean, and George for joining us this evening. This has been terrific.
Thank you, Teatown, and thank you, Bob Elliott, for hosting. And thank you all for showing up and for all your great questions and comments. Have a good night, everybody.
Don't forget Austin.
Don't forget Austin. Absolutely. Thank you, Austin. Have a good night, all.